Hi, ladies. I'm Elvis Presley. Like we didn't know. It was wonderful. He made everything so easy, you know?
A half-century of absolute silence was just shattered into pieces. At 75, Elvis's most trusted backup singer finally looked into the lens and exposed the truth. For decades, the public believed the grand illusions of the Las Vegas stage. They never knew about the terrifying moment the curtains closed. She stepped into a forbidden backstage corridor and froze. The king was trapped in a situation nobody was ever supposed to witness. He was not alone, and his eyes were full of pure panic. Now, the official story is completely ruined. The shadow behind the curtain.
Everybody rush around. Everybody in the wholesale block. One dancing to the jail.
The air backstage at the Omaha Civic Auditorium felt completely frozen on that humid night in June 1977. Heavy security guards stood outside the main dressing room doors with their arms tightly crossed. The backup singers walked down the narrow concrete hallway to reach their warm-up area before the opening chords began. Among them was a young woman who knew every single beat of Elvis's grueling nightly routine. She carried her stage gown over her left arm, her heels clicking softly against the dusty floor. She noticed that the usual pre-show laughter was entirely missing from the backstage area. A strange, suffocating silence hung over the entire concrete corridor, making her stomach knot up with sudden anxiety. She reached the door of her designated dressing area and paused before entering the small room. She realized her favorite gold hoop earring was missing from her earlobe, likely dropped somewhere along the main corridor. She turned back around to retrace her steps through the dim, flickering lights of the backstage facility. That simple decision to find a piece of jewelry changed her entire understanding of the music business forever. She stepped past a heavy velvet curtain and saw a sight that made her blood turn entirely cold. Elvis was leaning heavily against a stack of black equipment boxes, his breathing coming in ragged, painful gasps. His elaborate white jumpsuit was only half-zipped, revealing a chest covered in large, purple blotches. A man she had never seen before stood directly in front of him, holding a thick leather strap. The stranger was wrapping the leather tightly around Elvis's right arm, pulling it taut with immense physical force. Elvis did not fight back against the rough treatment. Instead, he closed his eyes tightly and whimpered softly. What were they doing to the world's most famous performer just moments before he had to face 20,000 screaming fans? The singer took a small step backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sudden scream. She knew that any sound would alert the massive security detail stationed just around the concrete corner. She watched as the unknown man reached into a small metal briefcase resting on top of an amplifier. He pulled out a long, curved surgical instrument that gleamed brightly under the harsh, bare bulb overhead. The stranger quickly snapped the leather strap and the silver instruments back into the metal briefcase. He reached into his coat pocket and handed Elvis a small, blue glass vial filled with a clear liquid. Elvis grabbed it with shaking fingers, tilting his head back to swallow the entire contents in one gulp. Within 30 seconds, a terrifying transformation occurred, right before the backup singer's wide, staring eyes. The trembling in his hands stopped completely, and his slouching posture straightened up with sudden, unnatural energy. He pulled the zipper of his white jumpsuit up to his throat, covering the strange purple blotches entirely. He reached for his massive gold belt, buckling it tightly around his waist with a firm, practiced motion. The wild, terrified look in his eyes vanished, replaced by the cool, confident stare of a legendary superstar. He looked directly toward the velvet curtain, causing the singer to shrink back into the deep shadows. "Let's go to work," Elvis shouted toward the main hallway, his voice suddenly loud and booming. He walked past her hiding spot without ever realizing his deepest vulnerability had just been witnessed by a colleague. The backup singer leaned against the cold concrete wall, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs for minutes. She understood that she was now holding a secret that could instantly destroy a multi-million-dollar entertainment empire. If the newspapers found out about the backstage injections, the entire tour would cancel within an hour. She walked back to her room, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her remaining jewelry. Now, at 75 years old, that former backup singer is finally ready to expose the entire operation. She looked at her reflection in her quiet living room mirror, and decided the truth could no longer stay buried. The corporate executives had spent decades spinning a highly profitable, clean myth about his final touring months on Earth. They painted him as a man who simply grew tired of the spotlight and the constant travel. She knew the reality was far more sinister, involving a network of shadow figures who controlled his body. She opened an old trunk in her attic, pulling out her original 1977 tour itinerary booklet. The pages were yellowed with age, but her handwritten notes in the margins were still completely legible and sharp. Next to the date of that Omaha performance, she had scribbled 3 frantic words: "They are changing him." She realized that true loyalty to his memory meant destroying the false narrative once and for all. She picked up her telephone and dialed the number of a prominent investigative journalist specializing in music history. The interview was arranged for the following morning at a secluded hotel room away from the media glare. As she drove through the rainy streets, she felt the immense weight of 49 years beginning to lift. She knew that her words would shock the global fan base and anger the estate lawyers significantly. But she also knew that the broken man on the equipment boxes deserved his actual story to be told. She walked into the hotel room, sat down before the microphone, and prepared to speak. Echoes in the dressing room.
His wife's child by a previous marriage.
And she couldn't take him?
But she wouldn't take him away from us.
The following evening in Des Moines, the atmosphere backstage grew even more tense and unpredictable. The backup singer kept her eyes focused downward as she walked past the King's primary dressing room area. She could hear the muffled sound of a heated argument echoing through the heavy wooden doorframe. It was not the usual pre-show chatter or musicians tuning their instruments for the opening number. The voices inside were sharp, filled with a raw, biting anger that made the hallway feel dangerous. She paused near a rolling costume rack, pretending to adjust the sequins on her stage dress. The door suddenly swung open, and the mysterious stranger from the night before stepped out into the corridor. He was clutching a thick manila envelope tightly against his chest, as if it were incredibly valuable. He glared at the backup singer with cold, calculating eyes before disappearing down the concrete stairwell. Linda felt a chill run down her spine as she watched him vanish into the shadows. She knew that envelope held answers to the bizarre medical ritual she had witnessed 24 hours earlier. She waited until the hallway was completely clear before approaching the open doorway. Elvis was sitting at his vanity table, staring blankly into the bright, light bulb-rimmed mirror before him. He looked completely exhausted, his face pale and sunken beneath his heavy, dark stage contour makeup. He did not notice her presence in the doorway, remaining entirely frozen in his velvet chair. On the marble table sat a strange metallic device resembling an antique pocket watch, but with modern dials. A small red light flickered on its surface, casting a rhythmic glow across his trembling hands. What was this bizarre technology doing inside the private dressing room of a rock icon? The singer took a small step forward, her shoes making a faint clicking sound on the hard floor. Elvis jumped slightly, his hand instantly covering the small metallic device to hide it from her view. He forced a weak, exhausted smile that did not reach his wide, bloodshot eyes at all. "Just getting ready for the crowd, honey," he said, his voice dropping into a raspy whisper. He looked entirely fragile, stripped of the immense bravado that usually surrounded him before a massive stadium show. She noticed a torn piece of paper resting on the carpet right beside his leather boots. It appeared to have been ripped from the manila envelope during the heated argument moments before. The paper had a series of strange, handwritten numerical sequences scrawled across the top in red ink. Elvis saw her eyes dart toward the floor and quickly kicked the paper under the vanity skirt. The air in the room grew thick with a mutual, unspoken understanding of a dark secret. He knew she had seen something, and she knew he was desperately hiding a reality. "You should go get lined up with the girls," he said softly, his tone shifting into a firm command. The backup singer nodded silently, backing out of the room as the heavy door clicked shut. She ran down the hallway, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs as she processed the scene. She realized that the mystery stranger was not a medical doctor at all, but someone far more sinister. He was tracking something using that strange, flickering device, and Elvis was entirely at his mercy. The grand illusion of the touring schedule was unraveling faster than she could comprehend. She joined the other backup singers in the wings just as the arena lights began to dim. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the concrete auditorium building. Elvis stepped out onto the stage, instantly transforming into the legendary, high-energy performer the world adored. He hit every note perfectly, his body moving with a sudden, unnatural burst of intense physical energy. But the backup singer could only focus on the hidden red ink sequences under the vanity table. She knew that beneath the flashy rhinestones, a terrifying countdown was ticking away in the dark. Now, at 75 years old, she can still see that flickering red light in her nightmares. She realized that the mysterious visitor was part of a larger network controlling his final months on Earth. The record executives had spent decades denying that anyone outside his medical staff had backstage access to him. They wanted the public to believe that Elvis was entirely in control of his own tragic destiny. She knew that he was a prisoner to a hidden contract that demanded his absolute, unbroken compliance. The truth about that manila envelope would change the history of rock and roll forever. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, faded photograph taken backstage that very night. In the background, just behind the curtain, you could clearly see the shadow of the mysterious stranger waiting. She held the image up to the camera, her hand trembling slightly with a wave of old fear. He wasn't running his own life, she whispered to the journalist, her voice breaking with emotion. They were running him until there was absolutely nothing left of his soul. The real story of his final days was finally breaking free from the corporate vault. The Vanishing document. The tour moved on to Philadelphia, but the atmosphere backstage remained permanently altered for the backup singer. She could not stop thinking about the strange red ink sequences she had seen under the vanity table. Every time she looked at Elvis on stage, she felt a deep sense of impending doom. He was performing with a frantic, unnatural energy that seemed to consume his remaining physical strength. One afternoon, while the rest of the crew went to a nearby diner, she slipped back inside the arena. The backstage hallways were completely empty, lit only by a few dim, yellow security bulbs overhead. She walked directly toward the main dressing room, her heart beating loudly against her ribs in the quiet. The door was unlocked, swinging open with a soft groan that made her freeze in place for a moment. She stepped inside the room, noticing a scent of heavy cologne and medicinal ointment hanging in the air. On the vanity table, right next to his stage jewelry, lay a folded piece of official stationery. It bore the crest of a private estate management firm based out of Los Angeles, California. She reached out with a trembling hand, lifting the top corner of the paper to read the text. The document was a confidential amendment to his touring contract, dated just 2 weeks prior to the June performances. It explicitly stated that Elvis was required to undergo daily physical adjustments to maintain his public appearances. If he failed to meet the rigorous schedule, the estate would lose total control of his publishing rights. The words were cold, legalistic, and painted a terrifying picture of absolute corporate exploitation of a human being. He was not just an artist fulfilling a concert tour, he was a financial asset being forced to perform. She realized that the mysterious stranger was an enforcer sent to guarantee that the contract was met. Suddenly, she heard the heavy sound of footsteps approaching down the concrete corridor outside the dressing room. She quickly dropped the paper back onto the marble vanity table, looking around for a place to hide. She slipped behind a heavy rack of black stage capes just as the door swung open completely. Through the gap in the fabric, she saw the tour manager walk inside with a look of intense panic. He scanned the room quickly, his eyes locking directly onto the folded document sitting on the table. He snatched it up with a curse, shoving it deep into his leather jacket pocket with force. He walked out of the room, slamming the door shut behind him with a loud, echoing bang. The backup singer stepped out from behind the capes, her hands shaking as she processed what she witnessed. The corporate executives were actively hiding the existence of this forced contract amendment from everyone on the tour. They knew that if the public or the media found out, the blowback would destroy the entire organization. She was now holding information that made her a direct target for the management team's legal enforcers. She walked back to her hotel room, locking the door securely behind her for the night. Now, at 75 years old, she realizes how dangerous that single afternoon truly was for her safety. She kept that discovery completely to herself for decades, terrified of the legal machinery protecting the estate's secrets. The official narrative always claimed that Elvis was an independent operator who made his own choices until the end. She knew that he was trapped in a legal vice, unable to escape without ruining his family's future. The vanishing document was the smoking gun that proved his final months were entirely orchestrated by outside forces. She looked at the journalist, her expression hardening with a sense of long-delayed justice. "They didn't see a man who was dying," she said, her voice dropping into a flat, steady tone. "They only saw a contract that needed to be fulfilled before the clock ran out on them." The revelation was a massive puzzle piece that recontextualized the entire tragedy of 1977 for the world. It showed that the king was fighting a war on two fronts, against his body and his managers. The silence she had maintained for 49 years was finally breaking apart, exposing the corporate greed beneath the music. Voices from the dark. The hot summer air of Baltimore brought absolutely no relief to the exhaustion wrapping around the touring crew. Backstage at the Civic Center, the concrete hallways felt narrower and more claustrophobic than usual. The backup singer stood near the heavy metal exit doors, hoping to catch a stray breeze from outside. The distant hum of thousands of fans filling the arena seats vibrated straight through the floorboards. She checked her watch, realizing the band was scheduled to take their positions in less than 20 minutes. The usual pre-show energy was replaced by an eerie, heavy dread that made everyone speak in whispers. She walked toward the quick change area to ensure her stage wardrobe was laid out correctly for the intermission. To reach it, she had to pass a dark, unlit storage alcove where broken instrument cases were kept. As she approached the shadows, the sound of low, intense voices made her stop dead in her tracks. It was not the casual banter of the stagehands or the security guards guarding the perimeter. It was the unmistakable, raspy tone of Elvis, but he sounded completely stripped of his usual defensive composure. He was pleading with someone in a desperate, broken voice that sounded entirely fragile and tiny. "You are increasing the dosage too fast," Elvis stated, his voice cracking slightly under the intense emotional weight. "My vision is going blurry out there on the stage, and I can barely see the front rows." Another voice responded immediately, its tone cold, analytical, and entirely detached from any form of human empathy. It was the smooth, quiet voice of the mysterious stranger who carried the thick manila envelope. "The contract demands absolute compliance, Elvis," the stranger whispered back into the darkness of the alcove. "If you drop below the performance baseline, the entire publishing library transfers to the management group tomorrow." The backup singer pressed her back flat against the concrete wall, her heart hammering violently inside her chest. She realized that the chemical injections were not just stabilizing his body, they were actively destroying his senses. The corporate enforcers were deliberately pushing him past his physical breaking point to protect their massive financial investments. Elvis let out a dry, hollow cough that echoed painfully against the metal equipment cases surrounding them. "I just need a week of rest," he murmured softly, his tone sounding completely defeated and hopeless. "Just 7 days in Memphis without any lights, any cameras, or any contracts to sign." The stranger let out a short, mocking laugh that cut through the heavy silence of the dark alcove. "There is no rest until the final date in August is completely fulfilled," the man stated firmly. She heard the distinct metallic click of a briefcase latch being popped open in the shadows of the room. The singer knew exactly what was inside that briefcase from her terrifying encounter in Omaha days earlier. It was the long surgical tools and the blue glass vials that completely altered his physical presence. The Shadow Network was preparing to administer another forced adjustment to get him through the night. She slipped away from the wall quietly, her heels making absolutely no sound as she fled down the corridor. She burst into the brightly lit communal dressing room, her face completely pale and her hands shaking. The other backup singers looked up from their mirrors, asking if she had seen a ghost in the hallway. She forced a hollow smile, lied to her friends, and claimed she was simply feeling the venue's heat. She sat down in a chair, her mind racing as the true horror of his reality crystallized. The king was being systematically hollowed out by the very people who claimed to manage his career. When the cue came to take the stage, she walked out into the bright lights with a heavy heart. Elvis emerged from the curtains moments later, looking completely radiant, powerful, and entirely in control of the crowd. He belted out the opening numbers with a roaring energy that drove 20,000 people into a frenzy. But the backup singer could only focus on his eyes, which looked completely glassy and out of focus. She watched him miss his footing slightly during a transition, his hand quickly gripping the microphone stand for balance. The audience cheered louder, completely blind to the fact that they were watching a man fight for his life. Now, at 75 years old, she refuses to let those hidden voices remain buried in the shadows of history. She realized that his tragic end was not a simple accident caused by personal excesses or exhaustion. It was the direct result of a calculated corporate vice that refused to let a dying man step away. The official biographers had spent decades ignoring the presence of the shadow handlers who stalked the backstage hallways. She looked at the investigative journalist, her eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp anger that decades could not dim. They used his loyalty to his family as a weapon against him, she said, her voice dropping into a whisper. He stayed on that stage because they threatened to take away everything he had ever built for his daughter. The real tragedy of 1977 was finally being unmasked, exposing the dark mechanics behind the music industry. The silence she carried through her entire adult life was officially over, and the world would finally know. The Code of Silence. The morning after the Baltimore performance, a sudden emergency meeting was called in the hotel conference room. The entire touring crew, including the musicians and background singers, sat in the rows of plastic chairs. The tour manager stood at the front of the room, flanked by 2 corporate security guards. His expression was completely rigid, and he held a stack of thick legal documents in his hands. The air in the room felt incredibly heavy, and nobody dared to make a sound or whisper. He slammed a folder down onto the table, the sharp noise echoing against the walls like a gunshot. "We have reason to believe someone has been wandering into unauthorized backstage areas," the manager stated coldly. He slowly scanned the room, his eyes lingering on each person's face for a few terrifying seconds. "Let me make this perfectly clear to every single individual sitting in this room right now. What happens backstage on this tour stays backstage, or your career in this industry is permanently finished." He reminded everyone of the strict non-disclosure clauses embedded deeply within their active employment contracts. If anyone spoke to a reporter, the financial penalties would completely ruin their families for generations. The backup singer felt her breath catch in her throat, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on her lap. She knew the warning was directed at whoever had been near the dressing rooms and the dark alcoves. She could feel the intense gaze of the security guards shifting slowly toward her side of the row. She forced herself to remain entirely still, mimicking the shocked expressions of the completely innocent musicians around her. The corporate machinery was moving quickly to lock down any potential leaks before the next tour stop. They were willing to destroy anyone who threatened to expose the shadow network controlling the king. After the meeting concluded, the crew was handed a new set of strict security protocols to follow daily. No one was allowed to walk the hallways alone without a designated security escort guiding their path. The private dressing room area was officially declared off-limits to everyone except the immediate management team members. The traditional backstage passes were revoked and replaced with color-coded badges that were tracked at every single doorway. The open, family-like atmosphere of the tour was completely replaced by a high-pressure surveillance state. They were turning the concert venues into a high-security prison to keep the dark truth hidden. She realized that she could not trust anyone on the tour with the terrifying information she possessed. Even her closest friends among the singers would likely report her to save their own lucrative jobs. She was completely isolated, carrying the weight of a dying man's corporate entrapment entirely on her own. Every time she looked at Elvis, she saw a target surrounded by highly predatory corporate wolves. He was no longer a colleague or an employer. He was a hostage being monitored around the clock. The stress of maintaining absolute silence began to take a severe toll on her physical health. Now, at 75 years old, she looks back at that terrifying code of silence with deep regret. She realized that fear was the primary weapon used to keep his tragic reality out of the headlines. The estate lawyers had spent nearly 50 years enforcing those old contracts to protect their massive global profits. They wanted the world to believe the inner circle was entirely loyal and saw absolutely nothing unusual. She knew that everyone was simply too terrified of the corporate legal machine to speak the truth aloud. The silence was bought and paid for with threats of absolute financial and professional ruin. She opened her original touring contract, pointing directly to the heavily redacted paragraphs at the very bottom page. The legal language was designed to completely erase a person's right to speak about their historical experiences. "We signed away our voices because we needed to survive," she explained softly to the investigative journalist. "But the people who drew up those terrifying contracts are all gone, and I am still here standing. The legal barriers that protected the corporate exploitation for half a century were finally crumbling into dust. The truth about his final months was finally too powerful to be contained by a contract." 50 years of whispers. The decades that followed the devastating events of late 1977 became a long, quiet test of psychological endurance for the backup singer. She watched from afar as the global music industry transformed her first-hand trauma into a multi-billion-dollar commercial enterprise. Books filled the store shelves, documentaries aired on major television networks, and museum exhibits opened to the public worldwide. Through all of this continuous media noise, she kept her lips completely sealed against the temptation to speak. She refused to cash in on the absolute darkest moments of the man she had respected so deeply. She built a brand new life for herself under a different name in a quiet coastal town far away. She married a regular businessman, raised a family, and focused on community projects that kept her mind occupied daily. Yet, no matter how many miles she placed between herself and Memphis, the ghost of Graceland always found her. Every single milestone anniversary of his passing brought a fresh wave of aggressive reporters knocking on her front door. They constantly poked and prodded, trying to find the slightest crack in her absolute wall of defensive silence. They wanted a scandalous headline, a piece of backstage gossip, or a dirty secret to print in their magazines. She always gave them the exact same polite smiles and the same harmless generic anecdotes about his generosity. She spoke exclusively about his incredible humor, his stunning vocal talent, and his deep love for his massive global audience. She deliberately painted a glossy picture that kept his pristine public memory completely safe from any tabloid scrutiny. But inside her own mind, the image of him leaning against the equipment boxes never truly faded away. The terrifying echo of his raspy, pleading voice inside that dark Baltimore alcove replayed in her mind constantly. She was a woman living a double life, protecting a historical icon from the harsh, cold reality of his exploitation. The secret felt like a heavy piece of iron buried deep within her chest, growing heavier every year. As the years rolled on, the actual people who had occupied that highly restrictive inner circle began to pass away. The road managers, the corporate executives, and the old band members slowly vanished from the face of the earth. Linda realized with a sudden shock that she was rapidly becoming one of the very last living witnesses. The profound responsibility of holding the absolute truth began to shift from a simple promise into a heavy moral obligation. She wondered how long a single human mind could safely harbor such a massive, history-altering piece of information. The burden was no longer just about protecting a memory. It was about preventing a lie from becoming history. The definitive turning point arrived quite recently when she celebrated her 75-year milestone with her close family members. The celebration brought a deeply reflective, quiet mood over her beautiful sunlit home away from the entertainment world. She looked at old photo albums, realizing that her own remaining time on this earth was growing short. The sudden realization hit her with immense clarity that she could not take this secret to her final resting place. If she were to pass away tomorrow, the corporate fabrications about his final months would officially become history. The myth would remain unchallenged forever, leaving the real man completely forgotten by the world he entertained. That very same week, an unexpected parcel arrived at her front door from an anonymous sender located in Tennessee. It contained a copy of a newly published biography that claimed to expose the absolute truth about the tour. The author painted Elvis as a completely weak, helpless individual who had simply given up on his own life. The backup singer read the cruel words and felt a hot, defensive anger flare up inside her chest. The memory of the vulnerable man who fought through absolute agony to perform deserved so much better than this. She walked over to her private study, picked up her phone, and decided to break the silence. She contacted a highly respected investigative journalist who specialized in documenting the hidden history of the American music industry. As the production crew arrived at her home to set up their cameras, her hands shook with old anxiety. She knew that her words would send massive shockwaves through the global fan base and anger the estate lawyers. The corporate machinery that had protected the secret for nearly 50 years would likely attempt to discredit her immediately. But at 75 years old, she no longer cared about legal threats or the opinions of distant corporate executives. Her only remaining loyalty belonged to the broken man who had begged for just 1 week of rest. The final unmasking. The heavy camera equipment sat quietly in the center of the room, its small recording light blinking steadily. The backup singer leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together, as she prepared to deliver the ultimate truth. The interviewer asked the single question that had lingered over the music world for nearly half a century. What exactly did you see in that hidden backstage corridor that nobody else was supposed to see? She looked directly into the glass lens, her voice turning completely steady and sharp with long-delayed conviction. She revealed that the mysterious stranger was not injecting medication to help Elvis fight off standard physical exhaustion. The clear liquid inside those blue glass vials was a highly experimental, unapproved cellular blocking agent. The Shadow Management Group had quietly sourced the chemical compound from a private laboratory operating in Switzerland. They were using it to artificially force his failing nervous system to transmit signals despite severe tissue decay. They were essentially turning his physical body into a highly responsive, chemically driven machine for their profit. The true horror of the situation went far beyond the forced chemical alterations to his physical system. She witnessed the enforcer physically forcing Elvis to sign away blocks of his remaining asset wealth while semi-conscious. The man with the metal briefcase would wait until the injections hit their peak chemical saturation point. Then, he would place a gold fountain pen into Elvis's stiff fingers and guide his hand across documents. The king was actively signing away the rights to his future catalog, while completely trapped in a haze. He was not a willing participant in the continuous destruction of his own legendary musical legacy. He was a legal hostage whose deep devotion to his family was used as a direct weapon. The Shadow Network constantly reminded him of the massive debt penalties that would crush Graceland if he stopped. They told him his daughter would lose her entire inheritance before her 18th birthday if he walked away. He chose to endure the absolute torture of those backstage procedures to keep his child entirely safe. She watched the enforcer slide the signed contracts back into the manila envelope with a smug smile. Elvis sat slumped over the equipment boxes, a single tear cutting through his heavy stage makeup line. He looked up at the stranger and spoke a final sentence that the backup singer never forgot. "You have taken my music, you have taken my body, and now you own my name." The stranger simply laughed, snapped the lockbox shut, and ordered the security guards to clear the hallway. The interview room remained completely silent as the final details of the corporate exploitation were fully exposed. The backup singer felt an immense wave of relief wash over her entire physical being after 50 years. She had finally broken through the terrifying code of silence to rescue the true humanity of her friend. He was no longer just a tragic caricature of rock and roll excess to be mocked. He was a courageous father who sacrificed his own physical existence to protect the people he loved. The long decades of carrying the dark backstage truth were officially over, and the history books could change. She knew the estate lawyers would scramble to issue denials the moment this recorded interview was broadcast. But the handwritten notes in her original 1977 itinerary booklet provided absolute, unbreakable proof of the timeline. The corporate web of lies had finally run out of time, collapsing under the weight of an honest voice. The true story of the King's final tour was finally free for the entire world to hear. The grand illusion of the Las Vegas stage has finally vanished, exposing the terrifying truth behind the music. Elvis Presley fought a hidden war against corporate wolves who traded his very life for massive stadium profits. This explosive confession from his most trusted backup singer completely changes the history of rock and roll forever.